quick one in the chat if you can hear us, if you can see me, and we are going to get jumping in immediately. So give me a quick one in the chat. I see a couple of people there. Nate, what's up, brother? Apologist in Detroit. Chris, how are you? Phenomenal to see all of you here and to be here. Let's go get started. So today we have with us very special guest, Dr. Carmen Imes. She is the author of, one second. Should have had it here with me. She's the author of this phenomenal work, Being God's Image. It's a follow-up, kind of, I don't want to call it a sequel. It's a follow-up to her prior book on Sinai and why, bearing God's name is still important. That book educated me and kind of, kickstarted me on some stuff in the Old Testament that I was absolutely not aware of. So I was anxious to read this. I've had it for quite a while, read it multiple times already. Did a Christmas talk about it with my family. So this is going to be awesome. Look forward to getting everyone's input. So joining us right this second is Dr. Carmen Imes. How are you, Dr.
Everybody?
Imes?
Doing well. Good to see you again.
Excellent to be here as usual. Honored that you're able to join us. Let's go ahead and dive straight in. And let me give a couple of caveats for some of the audience. See, there are some people out there. For the live audience, if you have a question, please preface your question. We will absolutely take Q&A. Preface your question in capital letters, question, and then it'll jump out and we'll see that it's a question. The questions will be for Dr. Imes, obviously. So let's go. So as I mentioned, we got a ton of these books here in my office to give away. Joel, you're getting the first one. So Joel, this book is yours. I'm gonna message you immediately afterwards. It'll be FedExed to you tomorrow. So on that note, Dr. Imes, tell us a bit about the book. What drove you to write this, other than probably a publisher saying your first book was awesome, write more?
Yeah, I mean, I got the idea for this book about a week after Bearing God's Name came out. I was lying in bed. I was thinking about how my book started in Exodus and traced the theme through the whole Bible of what does it mean to be the covenant people. And I thought there should be something to say about Genesis to the same audience that is enjoying this trip through the Bible. And so what do I have to say about Genesis? And then I immediately realized, because so many people who read the book began to ask me, they said, okay, you've tried to make the case that the reason why the people of Israel were not supposed to bear God's name in vain is because they represented God, that they had a representative role, that being in covenant with Yahweh means to represent him. And that seems like the same concept that we see in Genesis with being the image of God, that humans represent God because they're told to rule over creation. So aren't those kind of the same thing? And I realized that I needed to help make a distinction between them because of the scope. Every human being is the image of God, but only the covenant people bear his name. So I wanted to talk about what is different about being human more broadly that we can say prior to the question of what does it mean to be the covenant people. So it's very similar style, similar level of writing. I'm intending for everyone from high school on up to ready to meet Jesus can read the book and understand it. I tried to take out technical vocabulary, but it reflects a lot of doctoral level research that others have done. So my dissertation was the background to the first book, and this, which I consider a prequel to Bearing God's Name. Here they are side by side in case anybody wants to see how nicely they match. So this one is based on doctoral work that others have done on the image of God. I didn't write my dissertation on the image of God. I wrote it on the 10 Commandments, but I wanted to make sure that we had a really solid academic footing so that we could then reliably tease things out into different areas of practice.
So let's get down to nuts and bolts then. How do you define the image of God? Like as concisely as you can.
Yeah.
What is the image of God?
I'll first say what it's not. Many people attach the image of God to human capacities or functions. I argue that the image of God is our human identity. And that's why I say being God's image, not bearing God's image, because the image of God is not something we carry that could be set down or lost. It's who we are as humans. To be human is to be the image of God.
So how does that correlate back or tie back to, because you said this is the prequel to
Mhm.
Bearing God's Name. How do you connect the two of them?
Yeah.
What are the threads that make that work?
The way
Why is it
that
so important to lay out the prequel to make
Yeah.
perfect sense out of the sequel, so to speak?
Yeah. I see it as different tiers or levels of election. I wrote a paper many years ago on this topic. It still hasn't been published, but the idea is that like there's this larger, like if you think of a Venn diagram that's three-dimensional, there's this larger circle that's all humans are the image of God and represent his rule on earth. But then there's a smaller subsection, maybe sitting on top of that, that are the people who've been called to bear God's name. So they're in covenant with Yahweh. If you're a member of the covenant people, then your mission is to represent God to the rest of humanity and call them back into relationship with God, call them into a right alignment with their human identity. And as humans come into right alignment with their identity, their God-given identity and purpose, they become part of the covenant community. So all humans as God's image are supposed to be mediating God's rule to the created world, the non-human world, but covenant members are mediating God's blessing to the rest of creation. So there's several different tiers there.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that, if you would. It sounds like it's more nuanced than something that candidly I have repeated because it makes
Mm.
sense to me. But feel absolutely, I'm fine if you correct me on this. It sounds like you're saying it's more nuanced than simply bearing God's image or being God's image. Apologies, is a functional task. Like
Right.
that's the way I've defined it. I've
Yeah.
defined it as the image of God means that's your function. You're supposed to do that.
Right. So I
Seems
would
like it's more to it than that.
Yeah. So I would say the Imago Dei, or the image of God, is our human identity, which has implications for our function. It flows out. There's a consequence. The function that we fulfill or the role that we play is a consequence of our identity as God's image. So I don't want to connect them as being the same thing, because then as soon as someone is unable to fulfill a function because of some kind of physical disability or injury or whatever, then they lose their humanness. And I don't think that happens. We can't lose our identity as God's image. So I'm wanting to carefully distinguish between the two. And I think Genesis 1 makes clear that this is how it works, because it calls every human being the Tselem. We're made as God's Tselem, or image, which is a physical, concrete thing. We physically are the image of God, so that they may rule, so that you may rule over creation. So that is giving us the function. It's not giving us the content of the image.
I'm smiling because you're dangling a carrot in front of me, or a candy, knowing my personality, in front of me. But we'll go deeper in this later if time permits. But I got to ask point blank. You referred to Genesis 1. You referred to being created in His image. Can you clarify for me? Does that mean both men and women both equally were created in His image?
Oh yes, I mean that's very clear in Genesis 1:26. Male and female, He created them. That's the way the parallelism is working in the poetry of Genesis 1:27 makes very clear that men and women are equally the image of God. And if we are, then the so that applies to both of us, because it applies to all who are the image of God. And the so that is clearly rulership, which is not typically the first thing people think of when they try to define biblical womanhood. But we can come back to that later.
So, yes, we'll definitely come back to that later. A smidge deeper. Do you see in that you referred to Genesis 1:27? Do you see any subordination at that level there in that statement in Genesis 1:27? Because I don't.
There's no subordination in Genesis 1. There's
Got it.
no, I would argue there's no subordination in Genesis 2 either. Adam is made first, but there's no sense in which being first is better. In fact, in Genesis 1, being last is best.
Yep.
Right? God makes humans last. So
Yep.
it's a little funny to turn right around and in the next chapter say, "Oh, first is best."
Even the children.
Right.
Seth was, I don't want to say better, but
Yeah.
arguably he was a replacement for a son that,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, good. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you for correcting me. The audience seems to like that conversation. I promise we'll go deeper. We promised we'd be talking about AI and its impact, or how it relates to
Mm-hmm.
the image of God. So understanding now, as you've just defined it, which is in the book, FYI, how the image of God is most clearly, most accurately defined in Scripture. Do you think technologies like, for example, AI, can infringe on, or at some point potentially replace us as the image of God? What are your thoughts on that?
This is where, I did not set out to write a book that addresses the question of artificial intelligence. It was not my goal. I just wanted to understand, what does the Bible mean when it calls humans the image of God? And what I became convinced of is that to be human is to have a body made by God, right? And so our physical embodiment is what qualifies us. Any person who has a human body is therefore the image of God. And to decouple that from our function actually contributes a lot to this conversation about AI. If the image of God is human rationality or intelligence,
Yep.
which is by and large how people have talked about the image of God over the centuries, if it's we are better than the animals because of our rationality, then yeah, as soon as a computer is more rational than I am, then there's a threat to my personhood. But I actually am convinced that rationality is not the ground for human uniqueness or for humans are uniquely rational. I'm not trying to say that we're not more rational than animals or even than technology, but I don't see the Bible grounding our uniqueness or our dignity or our worth in that. It grounds it in our human embodiment. And so as long as AI is not a human body with DNA, is not embodied, then there's no threat to our status as humans who have been tasked with ruling over creation. I cannot hear you anymore. I don't know if everybody else can. Suddenly I lost you. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There you are.
I smacked my microphone. That happened.
Okay.
I want to delve not deeper, but you mentioned embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a bit of a touchy subject because of personal circumstances in my family right now, but crack open the egg on embodiment for us here.
Sure.
Specifically in terms of what happens when a human dies in this world. What happens to embodiment? Do we, if the definition, which I completely agree with and buy, if the definition is best defined as, the image has to do with our embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after we die? Do we lose that embodiment? Does something change about it? What just talk us through that a little bit, if you can.
That's a really excellent question to which I don't feel like I have a fully solid answer myself. But I will say this, I think a good case can be made for blessed consciousness, that after someone dies, they are conscious in the presence of God. So there's a sense of separation from the body that's temporary for the period of time between death and Christ's return. The scriptures are very clear that Christ is not the only one who's going to be bodily raised from the dead, that his resurrection was the first fruit of our resurrection, that humans are going to be raised to life in our bodies. And so I think that the intermediate state, if you will, is temporary and is probably not the best place to work out what the Imago Dei is. The Bible doesn't talk about Imago Dei or image of God in relation to the
Right.
intermediate state, but it does talk about our physical resurrection and our ruling, reigning with Christ in the new creation. So I think eventually we'll be restored to our bodies and we will be restored to the ruling over creation. That's a consequence of our status as the Imago Dei, which tells me we're still the image of God in the new creation. So I don't know exactly how to make sense of that blip in there. I'm not a metaphysicist, but
But
somebody
no,
else can parse that out.
you've pointed us in the right direction, I think, or at least given us food to digest and to process on. But it sounds like even death doesn't permanently remove or damage the image,
Mm-hmm.
our ability to be God's image.
Yeah. I agree with that statement. And I also, sometimes people ask me, well, what about a body that's been burned in a fire or,
Right.
completely decomposed? Most of the people, all of the people from Bible times don't have flesh anymore. Their flesh is completely decomposed, except maybe Joseph, if he was embalmed, which the Bible says he was. So maybe we'll get Joseph. So what happens then to the bodies of those who've decomposed? And I don't know how God's going to sort this out, but I trust that the one who created us and gave us DNA in the
Figure it out.
first place can reassemble the DNA and reassemble ourselves somehow. And the mystery of it all is that there's somehow continuity between our earthly bodies and our new creation bodies, because when Jesus rises from the dead, he still has the scars of his crucifixion. And so that tells me somehow there's continuity between these bodies. And so God will sort that all out, I trust.
I'll jump on this question right away. So where are we, if possible to answer this, in that period between death and resurrection? You have any thoughts on that, Dr. Imes?
Yeah, so I said earlier that human embodiment is the core of what it means to be the image of God. I should follow with another statement to clarify that I'm not a physicalist. That is, I don't believe that our bodies are all that we are. So I believe that our spirits, our soul, I don't like using the word soul because in a Hebrew Old Testament sense, the soul is the whole person, including the body. But anyway, whatever you want to call the intangible part of ourself, that will be in the presence of God. But I think many of us have been so conditioned to think about heaven, going to heaven when we die, and always being in that state where we're disembodied. And so what I want to pull us back to is a biblical concept of embodiment in the new creation. That period of time that we're disembodied is temporary. And that's not what we were made for. We were made to have bodies. These bodies are not just shells to be discarded. They're essential to our personhood and to our carrying out our human vocation.
Oh, that's so good. I don't know how I'm going to do that yet, but I'm so going to clip that out and make that like a YouTube short or something.
Sweet.
Our bodies are critical, important to the actual task that we're here to do. I love it.
Yep.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's click a couple of levels deeper on the AI stuff. So one of the things that we're seeing in AI now, and I understand this is not your field of study, so I'm really just genuinely asking for opinions, because candidly, I respect your opinion and I put a lot of weight on it. So from a biblical perspective and personal opinion, weave them together however you choose. The biggest thing that we're seeing in the AI space as of late, as of recent, is these chat GPT type, I think they're called chat bots is what the typical lingo for them is. Where I struggle with as a technologist, where I struggle with this is people are tending to treat those chatbots like a consciousness.
Yes.
And really, like I've studied this in depth. All it is a language model. They've been trained on what words go together with which words to make a sentence that means blah. So they use that calculation. They use that to determine what's being said to them, and they use that to be able to respond in a sensible manner.
Right. sensible, but not necessarily accurate.
Correct. Spot on. Spot on.
Yeah.
And candidly, I think we are probably a good 5 years away from the compute power to be able to do those levels of calculations linguistically. What works and how can I phrase this in a way that makes sense,
Yep.
while simultaneously checking for validity of the sentences that I phrase, like the
Yep.
facts that I'm
Yep.
spinning out. I think
Yep.
we are a good amount of years away from that. And the reason is not how do we programmatically do that. The trick is, how do we get sufficient compute power to
Hmm.
do both the linguistic calculations as
And the
well as the
validation.
fact checking, the
Yep.
validation
Yep.
calculations. I
Yep.
don't think we have access to that yet. Different
So
conversation for a different time. Go ahead.
yeah, so somebody, I can't remember who now, one of my Facebook friends asked Chat GPT not so long ago, what does Carmen Imes think about the image of God? Like, what does she teach the image of God is? And then he, sent me what he got out of Chat, and it was garbage. It was terrible. It was everything I'm saying, that trying to say the opposite of. It was talking about functions and, this is our function, and it was lost at the fall, and all the things I'm trying to say that it's not. But that happened just before the release of my book.
Yep.
And before I had done a lot of these kinds of conversations. I fully expect that our conversation right now is feeding into the data of the body of knowledge somewhere, so that if you asked Chat GPT in September, what does Carmen Imes teach about the image of God, it would be far more accurate because there's more data to work with. So my first impulse back when I learned what AI was, that it wasn't actually a city in Canaan that the Israelites fought against, but that it was actually a technology, and I started to understand a little bit about what it does. My first thought, honestly, was, we got to get to work. We got to put out more content, because that content is not coming out of nowhere. It's recombining what's out there. And there is a lot of garbage out there. So garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
So I'm really motivated to produce quality content, because a computer can't produce quality content without a human being feeding it that in the first place. So
Without
when
an imager
right,
feeding it in the first place. Like,
right,
I'm that's not just a marketing plug. I
yeah,
very genuinely believe that. Like,
yeah,
I've been working with technology for most of my professional life. Technology is amazing. It needs the human imager to
yeah,
really glue the pieces together, because it can
yeah.
get wonky super, 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 super easy.
It's like anything else that humans create, any other tool that humans create, it can be used for good or for ill. There are ways in which it's really helpful, and we all appreciate it. Algorithms are helpful in our lives for some things. I'm really glad that I don't get ads for things that I don't care a lick about.
Right.
I would much rather get ads for Biola University than for pornography, right? So because I'm always on Biola's website, I get ads for Biola, not for porn, and I'm really happy about that. So there are ways that AI is useful and is good for our lives, um, but it's not. I don't think it could ever replace human input. It can't sort through the moral good of
Yep.
something. It can't encourage someone the way we can encourage someone. I hear that there's even now therapy being offered by AI, like chat therapy, and I can't decide whether to be horrified by this or encouraged.
Horrified.
I
Horrified
actually,
is the right space to be.
I mean, I think that there could be some ways of perhaps someone might open up to a computer that's not going to judge them in any way, and actually sort through some medical or psychological issues and have something helpful if there's good training, good input on the other side.
Exactly.
I don't think we can replace relationships, but there are seasons of life where or problems that we face where, like, I don't really want to ask a person this question. It's sort of too personal. Right? So, it's like looking in an encyclopedia for a physical malady rather than asking your doctor. So there may be good uses for it, but I don't think it is ever going to replace us.
Yeah, one of the things that scares me vacillate between scares and upsets according to the time or place that I am on. It hits me differently, but let's go for now with scared. um, One of the things about the AI world that scares me the most is when people treat these chatbots as if they're sentient and start
Mm-hmm.
having conversations with it. So the whole,
Yep.
hey, like the therapy angle that
Yep.
you just
Yep.
spoke about.
Yep.
There's a group that I'm a part of. I think it's called Bible Study Based AI or something, AI based Bible study or something like that, where a
Okay.
lot of the members there do that kind of stuff. It's research centric, so I'm not anti that, but I
Yeah.
know if these researchers are doing that, it's probably in reaction to, or it's probably a telltale sign of the average layperson is probably going to chat GPT doing that kind of thing as well.
Right.
And that scares the bejesus out of me because these tools are designed to give you linguistically correct answers. There
Yeah.
is no indication or semblance of morality in it whatsoever. Like, and
Yeah.
sometimes they can put very specific morality clauses. Like, if you see this, it looks like it's asking you about a bomb or about something that can be harmful, you're not allowed to answer that. If it asks you about
Yeah.
something very, very religious, you're not allowed to answer that. But
Hmm.
those are explicit, yes, no,
Coded. Yeah.
right, coded things that are in there.
Right.
Um, you interestingly mentioned, hopefully by September, as the book has gotten out more, et cetera, et cetera. If someone goes to Chat GPT and asks it the same type of question, what does Carmen Imes think about the image of God? It'll get a more accurate answer.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, it probably will take significantly longer than that.
Okay.
Well, one of the data points on most, if not all, of the AI models that we have now, and again, the technical term is LLM, large language model.
Okay.
They've been trained on a data set that ended September of 2021.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So literally
Yep.
anything before September 2021, it has bits and pieces of it, but it doesn't have the entire context of it at all, at all, at all. So I could
Wow.
potentially feed it a PDF of your whole book and
Mm-hmm.
tell it, dissect that, summarize it, and in the context of that, answer me these three questions. It'll get that correct.
Okay.
But until and I'm saying this on purpose because I'm hoping that people in biblical scholarship take this up as kind of a rallying call. We need to start building a couple more large language models, GPTs, that have been trained on accurate biblical scholarship.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
whether it's publicly available or research papers or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is, this is my long rambling question. What are your thoughts on using tools like AI to increase biblical engagement? So the ability of a human to better understand and engage with their Bible. Do you think this
Yeah.
is
I
sensible? Is
mean,
there value to it?
I mean, I think the best case scenario is that we study scripture in community with other believers who have maturity in the faith. But given the inevitability of AI, I think that we should do what you've said and be serious about feeding, all the Bible Project content
Yeah.
to a database. And I think that it can be helpful. Years ago when Wikipedia started, people would say things like, "Oh, that's not serious scholarship. You shouldn't use that in a research paper. You shouldn't use that when you're writing a paper." It's like crowdsourced. How do we ever verify it's not peer reviewed? I, as somebody with a PhD, sometimes use Wikipedia, not as my final word on something, but sometimes you just want to know what's the state of things, what's the state of thinking on this topic. And if it's something outside of your immediate sphere of knowledge, it's a really quick, down and dirty, here's what I need to know. And again, not as a final word, but as here's a starting place. So why is the Red Sea called the Red Sea when the
Right.
Hebrew Bible always calls it the Sea of Reeds? I looked it up one time and Wikipedia helped me with that. And it suggested that, well, back, a long time ago, when Herodotus before the time of Christ was writing his histories, and he refers to it as the Red Sea and the Southern Sea, and the Black Sea is the Northern Sea. So there's a theory that from a Greek perspective, black is north and red is south. And so from where they're located, this is perhaps how it got its name. That's one theory among several. It's not, again, the final word, but I found it on Wikipedia, and it helped me get started in that research. So I think that AI could be useful for somebody starting out trying to make sense of the Bible. I think the limitations are we're going to pretty rapidly hit that brick wall, especially as you pointed out that, the data set's closed at the moment. There's a lot of poppycock out there about the Bible. And so we've got to sort through it all and find a solid place to stand. But I think if we could use AI to increase Bible engagement, let's do it.
Yeah, as a side project, which will probably end up, if I have my way, it'll probably end up contributing to research I will need to do for a PhD. I've already created a chatbot that's been trained on the same language model as ChatGPT, so it has the same linguistic capabilities. But in addition to that, I've scoured the internet for every public piece of content I could find with, rest in peace, Dr. Heiser's name on it. Because the reason I picked him, not only am I a fan of his, but he was a prolific writer. He had tons of blog posts covering probably the last 20 years.
And
when you throw into it transcriptions of the podcast, transcriptions of, he has multiple YouTube videos that are 3, 4, 5 hours long.
Yeah.
You throw in the transcriptions and all of that. Like, there was a lot of content there. I've already done that. So technologically, that's not difficult to do at all. I literally did that over a couple of weeks of work. So the idea that you suggested of maybe Bible Project, take all of their written content and, have that, I think that is infinitely doable and probably could be a great project to, help the I don't want to say fledgling, but, someone that needs you want at least a starter into, hey, I'm struggling with how to better understand this. And I'll give you a phenomenal example of it. I promise we would have gotten into this later, audience. Back to AI and, a ticklish subject in the Bible. So how would you, and this is answering a online type question, how do we classify a message, and you'll know exactly where I'm going with this, that was written by ChatGPT, a sermon, teaching, biblical teaching, that was written by ChatGPT. And now, myself or you or some preacher is reading it.
Yeah. We actually had a graduation speaker at Biola University this year who had Chat draft his speech for him. And he told us this. So he said, my job as a graduation speaker is to be unremarkable. You're all here to celebrate each other, to celebrate your accomplishments. You're not going to remember what I'm going to say. So since you're not going to remember what I'm going to say, ironically, I remember it, I decided to have ChatGPT write it for me. So he plugged his own name in and asked, what would so-and-so, I can't remember his name, actually, I just remember this. What would so-and-so say at a graduation at Biola University to the graduating senior class? And then he read us the speech that it came up with. And I think that it was fascinating because it was all the sorts of things like, reach high and, you're going to go places, kind of inspirational talk that you get. But there was no heart in it, right? It was devoid of actual human intention, which is part of what makes a sermon or a speech so valuable. So for a pastor who is using Chat to write a sermon, I would use Chat for a sermon the way I'd use Wikipedia for writing a commentary. You're not going to find Wikipedia in my footnotes when I'm done, because it was the first step, and then I did a whole lot more after that. I think for brainstorming capabilities or for coming up with illustrations or for whatever, it could be a useful tool. But the idea of a pastor standing up and just reading what chat came up with seems very irresponsible to me and empty.
Let's take that to the next level. What if, and again, leaning back on the notion of, being God's image. What if, so it's not Chat GPT, but now we're talking about, and this is going to be a little controversial. This is, hot topic on Christian Twitter right now, but I'd like to get into it. What if a man, a human, wrote the text, but no, take it easier. What if a female wrote the sermon, but a man is reading it? What are your thoughts on that? Does that break anything? Is that a violation of any type? And obviously the follow-up question to that is going to be, so if, a female can write it as a imager of God, but a man has to say it, where do you stand on the whole, so a woman shouldn't be able to speak in front of men at all, or, however you want to phrase that, shouldn't lead at all, the infamous, I want to say 2 Timothy 12, and I'm probably misquoting where that is.
1 Timothy 2:12.
Bingo.
If you were female, it would be thrown at you at least once a week. So I'm in no danger of forgetting that reference.
Amazingly, I am not female. That's not the amazing part. I get it thrown at me probably once every 3 weeks. So it's not weekly, but I come across it constantly because I very casually say stuff like in my marital context, like I am walking, living, breathing proof that my wife's role as an imager 100% contributes to our family. Like we couldn't do the stuff we do business wise, family wise, raising our daughters wise, without her contribution. And her contribution extends way beyond staying home and making sandwiches.
Yeah.
So I live this and I express this in my Christian context often. So very often I'll get but that's wrong because, woman shouldn't be speaking to a man. So leaning into that, and we'll probably glue it into AI somehow. So I'm on topic. But
so let me glue it to AI first by saying that AI is a new challenge when it comes to sermon writing, but plagiarism is not a new challenge. There has been plagiarism of sermons for a very long time. And so we could start with the question of, is it okay to stand up and read what someone else has written and portray it as your own? So I visited a church one time and they very awkwardly had to make an announcement about the previous week's sermon that had been discovered was fully plagiarized from some other source. And so the pastor had to get up, associate pastor had to get up and make a public apology. He was removed from preaching ministry for a period of time. They put him through a process of thinking, a process of discipleship and kind of restorative. Okay, what led you to do this? How are we going to make it so that this doesn't happen again? So I think that we need to be clear when we're speaking. So we need to be clear if we're preaching and someone else wrote it, where we got it from. I don't think it's a problem to depend on what's already been written to some, especially, this is different than in an academic conference when you're presenting a paper, and plagiarism functions differently there. I go to a church that's quite liturgical, and our liturgy is a remix of stuff from the Book of Common Prayer, to which we've adapted and added content and removed content and paired it with prayers we found somewhere else. So it's really quite plagiarized. Liturgy is by definition something written for multiple uses in multiple contexts. So liturgy is a little different than an actual sermon. I think in your church context, if it's okay for a sermon to be borrowed, then you should just find a way to be clear about that. And I have, for most of my life, attended churches where men did all of the preaching, but it's always been encouraging to me when a man who's preaching will quote a commentary written by a woman or a book written by a woman that he benefited from and give her credit in the sermon. And so then that's like one step towards, okay, well, she didn't write the whole sermon, but she contributed to your thinking. So what if a woman did write the whole sermon? What if in a complementarian context, the woman wrote the sermon and a man delivered it? It's an interesting thought experiment. Does the man provide sufficient authority to the giving of the message that it's okay if someone else wrote it? Because this is actually happening in some complementarian spaces where pastors utilize sermon preparation services that employ women, or it's a woman on his staff is doing the research for him so that he can throw it together at the last minute and add some of his own flair. So that's really interesting in a context where women are not allowed to preach. Uh, that makes us interrogate the reason why a woman's not allowed to preach. What is it? Is it the ideas of themselves that can't come from a woman? Or is it the delivery has to be a man because that's a symbol of authority? Or, where do we stand on this? And so then it could go vice versa. If a man writes the sermon, could a woman deliver it? Because a man wrote it. So if you think that the authority lies in the ideas, then a man should be able to write it and a woman can say it. But if the authority resides in the speaking of it, then it would go the other way around. And I actually question whether authority is the right word to use at all when it comes to preaching. I don't think that preaching is an act of authority necessarily. And I was in a conversation in Spanish yesterday on YouTube, on Twitter, which basically entailed me having Google Translate open and cutting and pasting what people were saying into Google Translate. Thank you, AI. And getting the translation that, okay, what do I want to say? So then I compose my response in English and then cut and paste my response in Spanish. And thank goodness Google Translate's much better than it was 10 years ago. So I think I sounded coherent. But I was engaging in a conversation on this issue. And one of the things that I said was, I don't believe that Paul thinks men should be doing what women are prohibited from doing in 1 Timothy 2:12. That is, Paul says to the church, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. And I take teach and have authority as a grammatical construction known as hendiades, which is two verbs that are combined with an and, that then are saying they're not do this and this, but they combine and it's do this. So teach in a way that exercises domineering authority, I think is how we should understand that. And there's no place in any of Paul's letters where he tells men to do that. So I believe that he's addressing a problem in the Ephesian context where women are teaching in a domineering way and they haven't been well taught first. Right. And so he's urging women to learn. I permit a woman to learn, and she shouldn't teach with domineering authority because she hasn't learned first. And because nobody should teach with domineering authority. If we go back to Genesis 1 and 2, male and female are both God's image, and there's no hierarchy at the beginning. So feel free to tie that back to AI somehow. Now that we went down the rabbit trail you wanted me to go down.
You've done even better. You've tied it back to the book. So you brought it right back to Genesis 1 and 2. So image doesn't have that subordination aspect to it. It doesn't have the functional aspect to it, meaning it's not tied to my ability as a human to be able to get a function done.
Right.
So if I become disabled or whatever have you, I don't lose my rights as an image. Let me take that a step further. What if I am not a Christian at all? I've struggled. Well, I shouldn't say I've struggled with this. I've had conversations with this again in my church context where the inclination is that Christians are made in the image of Yahweh. Those non-Christians over there are not.
That's dangerous. And so I think what the passage that just nips that one in the bud is Genesis 9 verse 6, which is after the flood. They come off the ark and God tells Noah, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made humankind. So the status as God's image is the reason why we can't murder each other. That's the reason why we're held accountable and why we have to treat every human life with dignity. And so I don't think it works at all to say Christians are the image of God and nobody else is. their aspiring images. Now, obviously, there is, if you're somebody who follows Jesus and you believe the scriptures, then you believe something is not quite right. When someone is not rightly related to God, something is off or something's been lost. And so I would describe that as when you're not in right relationship with your creator God, then you have then you're not living in full alignment with your human identity, your God-given human identity. And I liken it to a relationship with a parent, between a parent and child.
Yep.
Parents and children might become estranged from one another, but they can never undo their essential connection that's biological. My children's DNA came, like their chromosomes, half of them came from me, and that can never be erased. And so we could be estranged, but we could never not be related to each other. And in a similar sense, every human being is related to God. They're born as part of God's royal family. They might be estranged and need to be drawn back and drawn into alignment with that identity. But it's more of a sense of discovering what was always true about us than something new being added. So one illustration that might help is when I was 40 years old, almost 40 years old, I applied for a teaching job in Canada at Prairie College. And to my surprise, I discovered in the process that I am a Canadian citizen without ever knowing it before. So I spent 40 years of my life not realizing that I had dual citizenship. I was a US citizen. So at 40 years old, I find out, oh, because my dad was born in BC, I'm a Canadian. And I have a right to have a passport, a Canadian passport. All I have to do is mail away for it. And so I sent away for my proof of citizenship. And it's so funny because it came in the mail, my proof of citizenship, effective August 3, 1977.
Yep.
Was Carmen Joy Imes, August 3, 1977, was a citizen of Canada. That wasn't even my name yet. I wasn't
Yep.
married when I was born, right? But there's something that I think happened in that moment that helped me understand our identity as the image of God. So you could be going about your merry way through life. You could be already in your 40s and not realize you're the image of God. But the moment you realize it, you can send off for that certificate and you've got proof.
And
And
it's
it was effective.
retroactive. Oh,
Yeah.
that is so good.
Yeah.
That's another snippet I'm about to take out if I can figure out how. And that is some potent stuff. Potent stuff. I want to be super respectful of your time. I can only imagine how brutal your schedule is these days with the book and everything else. Um, any other questions from the audience? Now is the time to put those questions out, audience. Preface it with the capital letters question. For you, Dr. Imes, what else are you working on? What else should we look forward to getting from you, be it video recorded, book, whatever, in the upcoming future?
I am working hard every single day on a commentary on Exodus. So if you ask AI what Carmen Imes teaches on Exodus, you're likely to get a good answer. I have my YouTube channel just hit its 3rd anniversary last week. So for 3 years, well, I took a year off in the middle, but I had a year of content and then a year off and then a year of Torah Tuesday videos being released. And those are an outflow of my Exodus commentary research. So this morning I was plugging away on Exodus 15. I'm slowly working my way through the book. It'll be a couple more years before I finish, but it's been really a joy to work through a book that's so great. I am also working on a couple smaller projects, an essay on the Spirit's empowerment of women. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. You'll like that one. I'm revising a couple of papers that I presented at ETS or IBR for publication. So some other small projects. And maybe one that's especially fun to share about is I'm doing a collaborative project with another Biola professor. His name is Oscar Baldelomar, and he's a psychologist. Cultural psychology is his area of expertise. And so he studies the ethnic identity development of adolescents. Oof. And we are doing a joint project where we're writing a curriculum to help adolescents engage multicultural identities in scripture. So like as they read the Bible stories about people who experience multiculturalism or cross cultures or are refugees or whatever, using that as a springboard to help them wrestle with their own ethnic identity. It's a super fun project. So that's going to be my focus this fall.
Holy
Hi, Chris.
smokes. Are you, where, for the audience and for the replay audience, are you publicly speaking anywhere that mere mortals like us could have access to? So I'm talking
Mere
about
mortals.
not SBL, ETS, et cetera, et cetera.
We are all the image of God, Gregory. So
true. This is
there's
true.
no such thing as a mere mortal. We are all gloriously mortal. I am speaking in Louisiana in a couple of weeks. I don't know how soon people will see this, but on July 20, let me just look at my calendar, my paper calendar. July 21st, I'm in Monroe, Louisiana, and July 22nd as well at Lighthouse Messianic Fellowship, I think is the name of the church. And in September, I'll be speaking at Christ Church in Plano, Texas, September 16th. And it's a conference on the 10 Commandments for anybody who would like to sort of take a deep dive into what they mean. Peter Lightheart and I are the keynote speakers for that. And yeah, you can find me pretty easily on YouTube, accessible to everyone, because I'm doing interviews every day this summer with somebody for a podcast. So there's lots of content happening right now.
Smoke. So this is going live. It's live now, but it's going to be posted on YouTube immediately. So
Great.
People will be able to get access to it. I actually, it slipped me. It's on my calendar, but it slipped me that you're going to be in Plano. I live in Plano, so I will be at that event. I don't know the church. I had to go and look it up, but it's 10 minutes from my house.
It's an Anglican church.
Yeah, I will absolutely be at that event. So this is going to be an awesome.
I think
Texas, it'll still be summer. It'll still be like 90 degrees. So set your expectations accordingly.
I think I'm doing a lecture probably that Friday night, September 15th as well at a church in Plano, but I don't have the name of the church memorized. So just watch my social media to get the details.
Will do.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Dr. Imes, thank you so much for taking the time out of your super busy schedule to just be here with us, to conversate and to share your very candid wisdom, because that's really what I think it is. I think you are and this is not fluff or, blown smoke. I think you are the embodiment of proof that we are all imagers of Christ. And anyone, like I've used you as a point blank example, like to anyone that thinks, women are less skilled or less capable or whatever. I'm like, have you read her works? Like, you must be ludicrous to even contemplate that, there's some inequality there. So please continue the most amazing work. I'd like to say publicly as well, probably what I like the most about your work is how accessible it is. As I've started doing more things with school, I actually mentioned, a professor sent me an article to read and I read it. And I was like, I had to, like, is this English? Like, this is not accessible reading. And the professor, multiple PhDs, he was like, yeah, I so am used to dealing with academia that it slipped me that this was one of those articles that's not written for normal human consumption. I struggle with that a lot. Like, why? And that's not just in the biblical space. In my day job, cybersecurity, it's the same thing. There's plenty of experts that seem to strive to be as
opaque,
obscure as possible, so that sometimes it's ill intent because they don't want you to realize that they don't know what they're talking about, but sometimes it's just poor communication ability. And you excel in, like, I've heard you at ETS, SBL, break down super complicated things about, the Torah and the 10 Commandments and the plagues, the 10/11/13,
12
plagues, exactly.
12 signs and wonders is what you
exactly. Amazingly in just easy to understand, concise stuff. I can't encourage you enough. Please keep that up. Your entire audience appreciates it. Every time you fight the good fight on Twitter, we appreciate it. It helps,
in English or in Spanish.
Exactly, in English or in Spanish. So thank you. Keep it
Thank
up.
you. Yeah, it was encouraging to meet you at ETS. Thanks for coming to my paper. I have really smart friends who use big words and I respect them, but I feel like my particular calling is to try to speak as accessibly as possible. And so sometimes that might make it seem like I'm not actually that smart because I don't use the fancy words, but I'm actually trying to be understandable. So
Yeah.
that's my hope.
There's a whole cottage industry, and I tell people that I mentor, again, not in the biblical world, but in the cybersecurity world, which is candidly where I spend most of my time, still up to this day. Um, I've built an entire successful life model practice in cybersecurity on the ability to distill stuff down to a level that
Mm.
humans can understand.
Oh, beautiful.
Um, super, 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 super important. And I
Yeah.
present to the biggest CEOs, CIOs, of multi-$100 billion companies. And many of them will come up to me afterward and say, thank you for being clear and understanding. Like I
Mm,
could
mm.
actually grasp what you were talking about.
Yeah.
It made sense.
And here's the
There's a
thing,
Yeah,
people are intelligent. Like God gave
yep,
us brains. And so I feel like it's actually a difficult skill to use plain English to explain complex concepts. But sometimes when someone has gone through all the work of earning a PhD in their field, they they've either lost the ability to speak normal English, they don't know how to distill it, or they look down on other
yep,
people's ability to understand. And let me just tell you right now, I can't think of anything that I'm studying that y'all can't understand because it's we just have to go through the work of explaining it in simple terms. So having a YouTube channel has pushed me to do that. Being a mom and raising kids has pushed me to
yep.
do that, to be able to explain to them what I'm doing. That's been my hope, that I could do that for the church so that the church can be equipped. I want to bridge the gap between the academy and the church and start using accessible language to talk about theological truths. So
That's God's work right there. That is
mm,
needed. It is amazing. And I think candidly, it's a part of what we are put on earth to do.
mm.
So thank you, Dr. Imes. This has been a great show. Super engaging audience. Thank you. I will be mailing out plenty more of these to various people that are in the chat because I've been writing notes on who's in there. Thank you, thank you,
Cool.
thank you, Dr. Imes.
Thanks for having me.
It was an absolute joy and pleasure.
Blessings,
Later,
everybody.
everyone.